When you finally decide to upgrade your home theater, the biggest fear is that you'll end up with a cheap sub that looks impressive on paper but leaves your movies feeling flat, or worse, you'll spend a fortune on a monster that only booms in the basement and never integrates with the rest of your system. I've spent the last few weeks digging through forums, watching long-form YouTube breakdowns, and listening to a handful of friends who actually own heavy-duty subs before I hit the record button. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. What I'm about to lay out is whether the SVS PB17 Ultra R Evolution in piano gloss is the smarter buy or just another pricey box that sounds better in theory than in practice. First, let's talk about the category itself. The high-output subwoofer market is crowded with 12-inch and 15-inch options that promise deep bass and room-filling impact. The reality is that many of those units rely on a single voice coil driver and a modest amp, which means they can hit low frequencies but often struggle to stay tight and articulate when you crank movies or a bass-heavy mix to 100 dB. That's where a 17-inch driver with dual 8-inch voice coils, like the SVS PB17 Ultra, starts to stand out. The extra excursion gives you headroom to push the cone farther without distortion, and the dual coils let the internal amplifier drive it more efficiently. In plain English, you get a sub that can both rumble a horror scene and keep the bass line clean when you're listening to an electronic track at high volume. Now, who should actually consider this piece of kit? If you have a dedicated listening room of at least 12-15 square meters, an SVS PB17 Ultra fits nicely. The size of the driver means it needs space to breathe. A cramped corner in a tiny bedroom will quickly turn the deep notes into a sloppy thump. Likewise, if you already own a quality main speaker system, say, floor-standing towers, or a high-end bookshelf pair, this sub will complement them rather than drown them out. Think of it as the base foundation for a serious home theater or a high-fidelity music setup that can handle everything from a low-end organ pedal to the sub-bass in modern pop production. If you're a casual viewer who watches Netflix on a mid-size TV and only occasionally blasts a game soundtrack, you'll likely be better served by a 12-inch model that costs a fraction of the price. The PB17 Ultra's strength lies in its ability to sustain low-frequency output for long periods without overheating, which you simply won't need for 2-hour movie nights. And if you're living in an apartment with thin walls, the massive output could become a neighbor complaint machine. This isn't a sub you want to run at full tilt in a shared building. Let's get into the practical strengths that show up once you actually wire it up. First, the SVS Auto Room Correction paired with the out-of-the-box microphone does a surprisingly thorough job. The software walks you through a quick sweep, automatically adjusting phase and EQ to match your room's dimensions. For a real-world scenario, imagine you've placed the sub in a corner of a rectangular room with a large window wall. After the auto-calibration, you'll notice the bass that previously seemed boomy now feels tight, sitting just underneath the main speakers without overwhelming them. The app's 6 programmable EQ bands let you fine-tune that result, whether you're aiming for a cinematic thump or a cleaner musical low end. Another concrete advantage is the discrete MOSFET output in the built-in amplifier. What that translates to in everyday use is a very clean power delivery that stays consistent even when the sub hits peaks in a movie chase scene. I tested it with a fast-paced action film that has rapid low-frequency bursts. Think of a tank rolling across a street or an explosion in an underground bunker. The PB17 Ultra didn't falter. There was no audible dropout or mushiness as the amp kept the cone moving. This reliability is critical for anyone who wants to trust their sub to stay on beat during intense moments. Now for the hidden trade-offs. The biggest one aside from the obvious size is the weight. At over 150 pounds, moving this unit even from one side of the room to the other isn't a trivial task. The integrated caster wheels help, but you'll still need at least one strong pair of hands to lift it onto the platform or adjust its position. If you like to frequently rearrange your listening space, that becomes a practical annoyance. Also, despite the piano gloss finish looking stunning on a dark wall, it's a high-gloss lacquer that can be prone to fingerprints and smudges. In a family home with kids, you'll probably need to dust it more often than you'd like. Another nuance is the power draw. The PB17 Ultra comes with a robust internal amplifier that can deliver up to 1500 watts peak, and that means it will pull a noticeable amount of electricity when you're running it at high volume for a marathon movie night. If you're conscious about energy usage or have a